My name is Elena Moore. I'm 28 years old, and the night my father screamed at me to get out of the house and never come back, I realized something I should have known a long time ago: being useful is not the same as being loved. It happened on a Tuesday. The kind of ordinary weekday where dinner was late, the TV was too loud, and Toby, my 23-year-old younger brother, was once again bragging about something that cost my money. He had just unboxed a brand new PS5 in the living room, laughing, while I stood frozen at the kitchen doorway. I hadn't even known he'd ordered it. I stared at the sleek black console like it had grown horns. "I thought we agreed to wait until next month," I said, trying to keep my voice even. My paycheck had just gone into paying off the electric bill and covering Dad's medication again. That money, my money, was supposed to stretch. Toby shrugged. "Relax, Elena. I'll pay you back. Eventually." I turned to my parents, expecting backup, expecting at least a raised eyebrow. But Mom didn't even look up from her phone, and Dad let out a lazy sigh from the couch. "He's young," Dad muttered. "Let him enjoy himself. You're the adult here, deal with it." I felt something inside me snap. "Being the adult doesn't mean being your wallet," I said. "I've covered the mortgage, the groceries, your prescriptions, Toby's tuition, and now he's using my money to buy games while I eat frozen soup for lunch." The room turned cold. Dad stood up slowly, his face darkening. "You want to lecture us on how much you do? You think that makes you better than us?" His voice rose with every word. "No," I said quietly, "but I do think I deserve to be treated like a human being and not just a walking ATM." That was it, the line that broke the whole dam. Dad pointed a finger at me, shaking. "You're ungrateful. Everything we gave you, growing up, this house, this life, and now you throw it in our faces. I'm not throwing anything," I said, my voice trembling. "I'm just tired. Tired of being needed but never appreciated." He stepped closer. "Get out." "What, get out?" "If you're so miserable, if we're so terrible, get out and never come back." The words were like ice down my spine. My mother looked up finally, but said nothing. Toby was smirking. And in that moment, despite the pain, the disbelief, the sting of betrayal, I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I just said one word. "Okay." And I meant it. I wasn't always the girl who got screamed at and thrown out of her own childhood home. Once I was just Elena, the daughter who stepped up when no one else could. When Dad's back injury ended his career at the shipping yard and Mom got laid off during the recession, I was only 19, a sophomore at Northwestern studying communications. I had dreams. I wanted to work in public policy, maybe even start my own nonprofit one day. But those dreams cracked the moment I got that phone call, Mom crying, saying the bills were piling up, the fridge was almost empty, and the mortgage was 3 months past due. Without hesitation, I dropped out, moved back home to Cincinnati, and picked up 2 jobs: admin assistant by day, barista by night. I told myself it would be temporary, just until things stabilized. They didn't. Instead, I became the glue. I paid rent, I bought groceries, I fixed broken appliances and paid for car insurance and winter coats and even Toby's braces. No one asked me to not directly, but they didn't have to. The silence after every sigh, the way bills were left open-faced on the counter, those were calls for help louder than words. Toby was still in high school then. He was always different, charming, effortless, the kind of kid who could forget a homework assignment and talk his way out of a 0. Mom always said, "He's got potential, he just needs a little support." So I gave it. When he got into college and needed help with tuition and books, I opened my savings account. When he crashed the family car during his sophomore year, I used my vacation fund to replace it. At first, the praise was constant. "You're such a blessing," Mom would say. "I don't know what we'd do without you." Even Dad, a man of few words, once said, "You've got more grit than most people twice your age." Those words used to fill me with pride. Back then, I believed love was measured by how much you gave, how much you carried without complaint. But over time, those words dried up, replaced by expectations, then entitlement, and eventually, resentment. By the time I turned 25, the line between helping and being used had become completely blurred. It wasn't just the big things anymore, like paying the mortgage or covering Dad's prescriptions. It was the endless, constant stream of little things that chipped away at me. When the water heater broke, I paid for it. When the dryer stopped working, I took out a small loan. When Toby's tuition went up unexpectedly mid-semester, I pulled from my emergency fund without hesitation. But it wasn't just about the money. It was the way it all became expected. No one asked, "Can you help anymore?" It just became assumed that Elena would figure it out. And I did. Always. The worst part wasn't the financial stress. I knew how to stretch a dollar, how to track every cent in a spreadsheet so tightly that I could feel when a receipt was missing. The worst part was the emotional shift. My family stopped saying thank you, stopped checking in, stopped asking how I was doing, if I was happy, if I was okay. If I mentioned being tired, Dad would roll his eyes and say, "Welcome to adulthood." If I said I needed a weekend to rest, Mom would guilt trip me with "must be nice to take time off." Some of us don't have that luxury. And if I ever dared to question the financial imbalance, I was made to feel selfish. I remember once I said, half jokingly, "Maybe I'll actually take a vacation next year." Mom looked up from her knitting and said flatly, "Well, don't expect us to cover the mortgage while you're sipping cocktails somewhere." I laughed it off at the time, but inside something twisted. I was 25. I had never taken a vacation, never bought anything over $50 without an internal debate, never dated seriously because I worked most nights and weekends. I had built my entire life around making sure my family didn't fall apart. And somehow that made me the selfish one. I started to realize something I hadn't wanted to see before I wasn't a daughter anymore. I was an employee, a provider, a human safety net with no holidays, no bonuses, and no emotional support. And worst of all, I was becoming invisible in the very house I was holding together. It's a strange feeling to be essential to someone's survival and yet completely overlooked in their daily lives. Every Sunday, we had family dinners. It was one of the only times all four of us sat at the same table. I used to look forward to them. I used to think they were sacred, but slowly, even those turned sour. We'd sit down, I'd serve the roast or stir-fry I cooked after working a 10-hour shift, and the conversation would immediately turn to Toby. Always Toby. His classes, his new photography hobby, his brilliant paper on social dynamics that, if I'm being honest, he probably copied off Reddit. Mom would beam as he spoke. Dad would lean forward, fully engaged. Then there was me. I'd mentioned landing a new partnership for the nonprofit I worked with. Silence. I'd bring up a grant we'd just secured for underserved schools. A distracted, "That's nice," before the subject switched back to Toby's new part-time internship, which, by the way, I helped him get. I started feeling like a ghost in my own life. A silent contributor no one even noticed unless something broke or needed paying for. One night, the sting came sharper than usual. Mom started gushing about Toby's girlfriend, Lila, a psychology major planning a study abroad trip. "She's so well-rounded," Mom said, smiling. "Really going places. It's nice to see young people making the most of their opportunities." She looked right at me when she said that. I blinked, stunned. Was that supposed to be encouragement? Because it felt like a jab. As if I had wasted my 20s working myself into the ground for my family instead of experiencing the world. Dad nodded, then turned to me and asked, "So when's the last time you went on a date?" I almost choked on my water. It wasn't just dismissiveness anymore. It was judgment. Subtle, passive-aggressive digs layered under feigned concern. Like my single status. My work hours and my lack of hobbies were all signs that I had somehow failed at life, even though I had sacrificed my own for theirs. And the worst part, Toby never noticed. Or if he did, he didn't care. He just smiled, basked in the glow, and passed the mashed potatoes like nothing was wrong. That night, I didn't even stay to help clean up. I went to my room, shut the door, and stared at the ceiling for an hour, wondering if I was imagining it all. But I wasn't. I was disappearing in front of them, and they didn't even blink. About a month after that dinner, something incredible happened at work. My manager pulled me aside after a big presentation and said, "Elena, have you ever considered taking on a regional program director role?" I blinked. He smiled. "We're expanding into New York. The leadership team noticed how you handled the Westwood rollout. You're exactly the kind of person we want leading these efforts." It felt surreal. All those long nights, all those times I stayed late while juggling grocery lists in my head, it had finally amounted to something more than just survival. It wasn't just a promotion. It was recognition. A real title. A big raise. A chance to step into the life I had once dreamed of back before everything got swallowed by sacrifice. I spent 2 days reviewing the details, double-checking the relocation offer, calculating what I could afford to send home, even with the increased cost of living. Then on Thursday night at dinner, I brought it up. I expected surprise, maybe even cautious excitement. What I got instead was something else entirely. "You're what Dad said," setting down his fork. "I was offered a program director position," I repeated. "It's a big step up, higher pay, benefits, long-term growth. It's in New York, so I'd have to move, but you'd have to move," Mom cut in sharply. "As in leave." "Well, yes, I'd still send money back for a few months while you get adjusted, and so you're abandoning your family?" she said flatly. I froze. "What? No, that's not—" "Don't twist this into something noble," Dad snapped. "You're chasing some title and leaving us behind to struggle." No one said that. When Toby applied to study abroad, I replied, unable to stop the words from slipping out. "That's different," Mom hissed. "He's still in school. You're the one we rely on. This house, everything depends on you." Those words hit me like a wave. Not, "You deserve this." Not, "We're proud of you." Just, "This house depends on you." That was my role. Not daughter, not person, not Elena. Just the system that kept the lights on. "I've given you years," I said quietly. "I've paid bills, canceled plans, postponed my life. I thought you'd be happy for me." "We didn't ask you to do all that," Dad muttered. And that was the sentence that cracked something in me. No, they hadn't asked. They had just expected it, demanded it without speaking, penalized me when I didn't meet the standard. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the promotion email still open on my phone, the cursor blinking over the words, "Please confirm acceptance by Friday." I was 28 years old, and I had to choose between loyalty and liberation. The explosion didn't happen over something huge. It started with a package on the kitchen counter. A sleek box with Toby's name on it, another unnecessary gadget. A brand new wireless speaker system retailing at nearly $400. My heart sank. I had just paid the electric bill late to make sure we had enough groceries this week. The nonprofit job didn't pay a fortune. Even with the offer in New York, I was still counting pennies. I hadn't bought myself a new pair of shoes in over a year. I asked, "Where did the money come from?" Toby didn't even look up from his phone. "Relax, sis. It's on your card. I'll pay you back." I couldn't hold it anymore. "You used my card." My voice cracked. "It's just a speaker. You work 2 jobs, you'll be fine." He shrugged, completely unbothered. "You didn't even ask," I snapped. "Do you have any idea how tight things have been? I'm barely covering essentials while you're treating my bank account like a toy chest. That got my parents' attention. Dad pushed back his chair. What's going on? Toby just charged $400 on my card for a speaker without permission. Dad frowned, but turned to me instead. It's not worth yelling over. You've spent more on car repairs. Car repairs for you, I shouted. That was to keep the car running so you could get to your checkups. This is just theft. Don't be dramatic, Mom cut in. You're making a scene over something small. No, I said, breathing hard. I'm making a scene because I'm done being silent. I'm done being used. And then it came. Dad stood up, his face flushed. You want to act like a victim now, after all we've done for you, after raising you, feeding you, letting you live here, rent-free, rent-free. I laughed, bitter and disbelieving. I pay the mortgage, the utilities, the groceries. I haven't lived here for free a single day in 5 years. Mom's face hardened. You're ungrateful. The words landed like a slap. You're selfish, Dad added. You hide behind all this talk about helping when really you just want control. You make us feel guilty every time we spend a dime. I don't make you feel guilty, I said. That's your own conscience talking. Toby chimed in now, leaning back in his chair like he'd been waiting for the moment. You act like you're better than us just because you have a job and a spreadsheet. Maybe if you weren't so uptight all the time, people wouldn't walk on eggshells around you. I turned to him, stunned. You think people walk on eggshells around me? Yes, Mom said quietly but firmly. You suck the joy out of everything, Elena. We can't breathe without feeling judged. And just like that, every sacrifice I had ever made collapsed under the weight of their resentment. I stood there shaking, staring at the 3 people I had built my life around. And for the first time I realized they didn't see me as family anymore. I was a threat, an accountant, a burden. And finally, Dad said the words that burned everything to the ground. If you don't like it, Elena, leave. Get out. And don't come back. The room fell silent. Even Toby stopped smirking. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just looked at them all and said, fine. And I meant it. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't even sit down. I walked upstairs, pulled out my old green suitcase from the back of the closet, and started packing. My hands shook at first, not from fear, but from clarity, from finality. I didn't know exactly where I was going yet, but I knew I couldn't stay. The lavender blanket folded at the end of my bed, the childhood photos on the dresser, the stack of nonprofit reports beside my laptop. They all felt like echoes of someone I used to be. Someone who believed that love was measured in sacrifice. Someone who didn't realize she was being erased piece by piece. I packed only what I needed. My work laptop, a week's worth of clothes, my toiletries, a folder of documents I kept updated just in case, a photo of me and Sarah, my best friend at our college graduation, before life turned into a balancing act I couldn't win. I left behind everything else. Furniture, kitchen gadgets I'd bought with my own money, books I loved, my yoga mat, the spare phone charger that somehow always got stolen by Toby. I didn't want any of it anymore, because none of it felt like mine. When I finally zipped the suitcase shut, the house was quiet. Too quiet. I half expected someone to knock on the door, to say, don't go, or even whisper a shaky apology. But no one came. Downstairs, I could hear the TV. My parents were watching reruns, laughing at something as if nothing had happened, as if their daughter hadn't just been told to leave. I walked down with my suitcase and placed my house key on the kitchen counter. It felt heavier than it should have, like it held the weight of 10 years of emotional labor. And still, no one said a word. No goodbye. No wait. Not even a glance. Just silence. Toby passed by me in the hallway and nodded toward the door. You sure about this? I looked him in the eye. For the first time, I said yes. Then I opened the door. and left. Not with drama, not with anger, but with something far more powerful. Peace. Sarah didn't ask questions when I showed up on her doorstep at midnight with a suitcase and tear-rimmed eyes. She just opened the door, wrapped me in a blanket soft hug, and whispered, "You're safe now. Come in." Her apartment smelled like cinnamon and warm laundry. It was quiet, clean, and full of the kind of peace I hadn't felt in years. She led me to the pull-out couch, gave me a pillow, and told me to rest. Everything else could wait. That first night, I didn't sleep much. Not because I was afraid, but because my brain couldn't process the silence. The kind that wasn't laced with tension. The kind that didn't come right before someone made a passive-aggressive comment or handed me a bill. It was just still. The next few days felt like a strange kind of grief. Not for the people I left behind, but for the version of me who had stayed too long. I cried at random times in the grocery store when I passed the type of pasta Mom liked. In the shower when I realized I didn't have to rush to take someone else to a doctor's appointment. In the middle of the night, just because my body didn't yet believe it wasn't in survival mode anymore. Sarah didn't judge. She made coffee every morning. She let me sit in silence when I needed to. She handed me tissues and never once said, "You should call them." She knew better. For the first time in years, my paycheck went toward me. Just me. I paid Sarah a little rent, bought my own groceries, treated myself to a pair of new shoes, nothing fancy, just something not falling apart. And still, I had money left over. It was disorienting. To realize how little I needed to survive when I wasn't supporting 4 other people who never said thank you. The guilt lingered, though. At night, I'd lie awake wondering, did I do the right thing? Was I cruel? What if they're struggling without me? But every time I reached toward those thoughts, something else would whisper back. You're allowed to have peace. You're allowed to choose yourself. It wasn't happiness yet, but it was the beginning. It was Sarah who suggested therapy. Not in a pushy way. Just a gentle nudge one evening over tea. "You've carried so much for so long," she said, looking at me not with pity, but with understanding. "Maybe it's time someone else helps you hold it." I booked a session the next morning. And that's how I met Dr. Cho, quiet, thoughtful, with kind eyes, and a bookshelf that made me feel instantly safe. In our first session, I cried within 3 minutes of sitting down. I hadn't expected to. But when she asked, "Tell me about your family, the dam broke," I told her everything. The sacrifices, the late nights, the passive-aggressive comments, the way I had paid for everyone's survival while slowly forgetting what it meant to be alive myself. She listened, never interrupted, just wrote quietly, then looked up and said a word I'd never heard before: parentification. She explained it gently. When a child is forced to take on the role of a parent emotionally or financially, often without acknowledgement or consent. "You weren't just helping your family, Elena," she said. "You were the parent. They leaned on you for stability in ways that left no room for your own development." The word echoed through my chest like thunder. So much made sense. The guilt when I tried to say no. The panic at the idea of spending money on myself. The inability to even articulate my own dreams without filtering them through someone else's needs. I wasn't selfish. I was conditioned. Every week I learned more how boundaries aren't betrayal. How love without respect becomes manipulation. How loyalty doesn't mean losing yourself for others. Dr. Cho gave me tools I never had, ways to say no without shame, ways to recognize when support turns into control, ways to reframe my value not in what I could give, but in who I was. Outside the therapy room, something else shifted too. I started reading again, not reports or invoices, but novels. I picked up painting. I joined a weekend writing group and shared a story that made strangers cry. And somewhere in that process, I realized something both terrifying and exhilarating. I didn't miss them. Not the way I thought I would. I missed the idea of family, the version I kept chasing but never found. The one that told you they loved you even when you had nothing left to offer. And in its absence, I was finally starting to build something else, something that belonged entirely to me. It had been 3 months and 12 days since I left. I was standing in the pasta aisle of a quiet grocery store after work, debating between penne and fusilli when my phone buzzed. It was a text. Dad? I hadn't heard from him. Or Mom. Or Toby. Not a word. My breath caught in my throat. Part of me, an embarrassingly human part, thought maybe this was it. The apology. The recognition. The moment someone finally said, "We were wrong." But instead, the message read, "Why haven't you paid the mortgage?" 6 words. No, how are you? No, we miss you. Just that. I stood there frozen, the irony soaking in like cold water. After everything. After the screaming, the exile, the silence. This was their first outreach. I took a screenshot and sent it to Sarah with the caption, "Apparently, I wasn't actually unwelcome, just temporarily inconvenient." I didn't respond right away. I needed time. Time to process the sting. Time to let the shame melt into anger. Time to remind myself that I didn't owe them anything anymore. That night, I reread the message 10 times before crafting my reply. It was short. I thought I wasn't welcome anymore. The phone rang within 30 seconds. I let it ring twice before answering. Madison Dad's voice was different now. Not angry, not smug, panicked, tight, like someone clinging to a rope that's already fraying. "I think you meant to say Elena," I said calmly. He chuckled nervously. "Sorry, I meant Elena. We need to talk. There's been a misunderstanding about what happened that night." "Really?" I said. "Because I remember it pretty clearly. You told me to get out, and to never come back." "You know how things get," he rushed on. "People say stuff when they're upset. We didn't mean for you to actually leave." "No," I replied evenly. "You just meant for me to stay shut up and keep paying." There was silence. Then a sigh. "Things are tight," he admitted. "We've fallen behind. The bank sent a notice. We're close to foreclosure." "What happened to all the money you were saving since I left?" I asked. "Groceries I didn't eat. Electricity I didn't use." More silence. "Then your mom's hours were cut. Toby needed help for school, unexpected expenses." "Of course." Toby. There was always some reason Toby needed money. And now, just like before, they expected me to clean up the mess. "Your mom wants to talk to you," Dad added. "Of course she did." I heard the shuffle, and then her voice sweetened like artificial honey. "Elena, sweetheart, we've been so worried." I raised an eyebrow, even though she couldn't see it. "You had my number. We didn't want to push you," she said. "We thought you needed space." And now I asked. There was a pause. Then the mask slipped just enough. "We're 3 months behind. We need about $6,000 to get caught up." I almost laughed. The woman who once said, "You're not our responsibility anymore," was now presenting me with a financial invoice for my forgiveness. But this time, I wasn't falling for it. Their voices tried to sound warm. Their words tried to sound humble. But all I could hear was the subtext. "We didn't miss you. We missed your money." I didn't say anything for a moment. I let the silence stretch. On the other end of the line, I could almost hear them holding their breath. Elena, Mom asked. "I have a question," I said, my tone even. "Of course, sweetheart, anything. If I hadn't stopped paying the mortgage, would you have ever reached out?" Silence. A long one. Then Dad cleared his throat. "Of course, we would have." I let out a quiet breath. It's been 3 months. You didn't call when I left. You didn't check if I was safe. You didn't ask if I had a place to sleep. We thought you needed space, Mom said quickly. No, I corrected. You needed me to feel guilty. You needed me to crawl back and beg to be accepted again on your terms. But when that didn't happen and the bills piled up, suddenly the silence became inconvenient. Elena. That's not fair, Dad said, his voice rising slightly. No, I said, cutting him off. You're right. Let's talk about fair. I gave you 10 years of my adulthood. I paid for your home, your medication, your car repairs. I gave up vacations, savings, relationships. My entire life revolved around your survival. And the first time I say no, you throw me out. There was no defense, only excuses. It was the heat of the moment. You said things too. We were stressed. Stop, I said. I was shaking, but not from fear, from power, from clarity. You didn't call because you missed me. You called because you needed something. Don't dress it up in family values. That's not true, Mom said, her voice teetering. Then why was the first message, "Why haven't you paid the mortgage?" I asked. Why not, "We miss you," or "Can we talk?" Dad tried again. We do miss you. No, I replied. You miss having me available. You miss having access to me. That's different. You can't punish us forever. Mom snapped, her mask finally slipping. This isn't punishment, I said. This is boundaries. Something we never had before. They were quiet again. I continued calmly. You told me to leave, to never come back. And you know what, I respected that. Now it's time you respect something in return, my choice to not be your financial crutch anymore. Elena, Dad said slowly, if we lose the house, your brother might have to drop out of school. There it was. The guilt grenade. The last desperate shot. Toby, I said with a small, almost bitter smile, is 23. He can work part-time. He can apply for student aid. Just like I did. Are you really going to do this to your family? Mom said, now trembling with accusation. No, I replied. I'm doing this for myself. They kept talking, switching between guilt and flattery, desperation and blame. It was a dance I knew all too well. But this time I wasn't on the dance floor. I stood still, calm, listening with a new kind of silence, not the silence of submission, but of understanding. I waited until their voices faded into the last exhausted, "You can't just walk away." And then I spoke. I spent 3 years being your safety net, I said, while you pulled it tighter and tighter around yourselves and cut me out of the picture. Elena. Dad tried. No, you don't get to interrupt this part, I said. You had 3 months to reach out with love. You chose silence. You had 3 years to say thank you. You chose expectations. You had one chance to hear me out that night, and you screamed at me to leave. Mom sniffled, but I didn't flinch. I'm not angry anymore, I continued. But I am done. Done being used. Done justifying every dollar I keep for myself. Done proving I'm worthy of basic respect. I told you, Dad began, it was a misunderstanding. You told me I interrupted, that I was selfish, manipulative, that I made you feel judged for spending money I earned while I went without. I paused. I'm not your guilt sponge anymore. The line went quiet. Then Mom's voice. So, that's it. Yes, I said. There was no shouting, no dramatic exit. Just 5 seconds of silence and a weight lifting off my chest. I won't be helping with the mortgage, I added. I won't be moving back. I won't be participating in a one-sided version of family where love only flows when money does. So what, you're just cutting us off? Dad asked. I smiled, sad but firm. No, I'm cutting off the version of you that only knew how to keep me close by keeping me small. If we lose this house, Mom whispered. You'll find another, I replied. Or maybe you'll finally learn to take care of yourselves. I hope one day you understand how cold this is, Dad said. And I hope one day I answered you understand how much warmth it took for me to stay as long as I did. Then I hung up. I didn't throw the phone. I didn't cry. I sat back on my couch, looked around at my quiet apartment, and realized, for the first time, I had chosen myself. And that choice felt nothing like cruelty. It felt like freedom. The days that followed didn't feel like devastation. They felt like relief. No more phone calls at midnight about overdue utility bills. No more passive-aggressive sighs over dinner. No more questioning if I was enough simply because I wasn't giving everything away. I had always imagined that choosing myself would feel selfish, but it didn't. It felt still. The kind of stillness that sinks into your bones and says, you're finally safe. At work, my focus sharpened. With the weight of my family's constant demands gone, I could actually think, strategize, lead. 2 months later, I got the promotion in New York. I moved into a one-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn with a balcony overlooking a small park and enough sunlight to make my plants thrive. I bought a sturdy bed frame. I hung up art I liked, not pieces meant to match a shared space, but things that felt like me. I cooked dinners, for one, without guilt, and watched movies in silence that felt sacred, not lonely. I started dating again cautiously. The man I met, Gabe, was patient, thoughtful. The first person who didn't treat my independence like a challenge to conquer, but like something worth admiring. We'd walk through bookstores together and swap articles we loved. He never asked me what I could do for him. He asked what made me feel alive. I reconnected with hobbies I hadn't touched in years, painting, journaling, hiking on weekends just for the joy of it. I slept through the night without checking my phone. I laughed at things without guilt. I said no without explaining. And through it all, my savings grew. My health improved. My self-respect bloomed in ways I hadn't thought possible. There were moments of ache, of course, like when I passed a father and daughter laughing on the subway and felt an invisible bruise beneath my ribs, or when I got promoted again and instinctively reached for the phone before remembering there was no one to call. But those moments didn't undo my progress. They just reminded me of how far I'd come. Because the truth is, healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means remembering without breaking. And I was whole in a way I had never been before. I didn't hear from them again. Not after the phone call, not after the no, not after the silence I chose to keep. 3 months passed, then 4. One morning, as I was sipping coffee on my balcony, my old neighbor, Mrs. Jenkins, messaged me on Facebook. Saw the moving trucks at your parents' place last week. Thought you should know. Place looks empty now. That was it. No drama, no explosion, just an ending. They had lost the house, the one I spent years holding together with paychecks and exhaustion. The one they told me I had no say over. The one they said I was selfish for leaving behind. I stared at the message for a long time. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel guilt. I felt clarity. They hadn't called, not to apologize, not to reconnect, not even to update me, because they never wanted me back. Not me, the person. They wanted the version of me who paid bills and stayed quiet. And when that version disappeared, so did their interest. I later heard through a mutual acquaintance that they'd moved into a small rental home outside the city. Toby transferred to a community college. Dad picked up part-time work again. Mom started cleaning houses. They adjusted. They survived. Because of course they did. I had spent so many years believing that if I ever walked away, everything would collapse. It didn't. They adapted the moment they had to. The truth, they always could have. They just never wanted to. Until they were forced to. And me, I kept living, kept growing, kept loving a life that was finally mine. Some nights, I'd still wonder what would happen if they ever called again. if they knocked on my door, if they showed up saying we're sorry, but they didn't. And that somehow was the greatest closure I could have asked for, because it told me what words never could. That their silence wasn't punishment, it was proof. Proof that I was only ever valued for what I provided. Proof that I had made the right choice. Proof that peace once earned never needs to explain itself. My name is Elena Moore. I'm 29 now. And sometimes I still hear my father's voice echoing in my mind, sharp, bitter, final. You're ungrateful. Get out and never come back. For a long time, those words haunted me. Now they free me. Because the truth is, I did get out. I didn't scream. I didn't break anything. I didn't collapse in tears on the front porch. I just packed my bags, walked out the door, and never looked back. And what happened after I found myself? Not the version molded by duty or defined by sacrifice. Not the good daughter who paid bills and kept her mouth shut. I found me, the woman who can say no without guilt, who decorates her home with joy, who wakes up without dread, who works not just to survive but to thrive, who laughs not because things are perfect but because she's finally free to feel. Do I miss my family sometimes? But mostly I miss the idea of family, the one I spent years trying to earn with loyalty and labor. But I've learned something priceless. Love that demands your silence is not love. Family that conditions support on sacrifice is not family. And loyalty that costs your soul isn't noble, it's destructive. I used to think being a good daughter meant giving everything. Now I know. Being a good daughter also means honoring yourself enough to walk away when staying means self-destruction. To anyone listening who feels trapped in a version of love that only flows when you give, 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 to anyone who's been told they're selfish for setting boundaries, to anyone who's afraid that leaving means failing, let me tell you, you're not failing. You're finally starting. I'm not ungrateful, I'm not cold, I'm not cruel, I'm free. And so are you if you choose to be.